we talked about how we're too busy to take the time and give ourselves the space to reflect on how we feel and how things are going. Sometimes also we keep ourselves busy because we're maybe too scared of deeply looking at how we're actually feeling, because we know deep down that if we start doing this, if we start honestly observing the way we feel inside and the way we behave on a day-to-day basis, this might lead to very big changes, and big changes can be very scary. So sometimes it just feels a little bit more reassuring and comfortable to just keep busy and not look too closely as to how we feel.
Welcome to This Anthro Life, everybody. Really excited to have you joining us today. As always, I'm your host, Adam Gamwell. And I'm thrilled to be joined today with Dr. Anne-Laure Le Cunff. She's the founder of Nest Labs and the author of a really, really cool forthcoming book I'm excited to dive into today with y'all. It's called Tiny Experiments, How to Live Freely in a Goal-Obsessed World. And this is something that definitely resonated with me as someone who is both goal-obsessed and trying to get out of that circuit. So, Anne-Laure, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm so excited to chat with you.
Awesome. So one thing that I'm really particularly excited to talk with you about is the way that your work intersects with some of the most pressing questions that a lot of us are facing today, and things like, how do I find fulfillment in a world that feels like it's pushing me in one direction? Go get this degree, get this job, do this thing, X, Y, Z. It's always this very linear kind of path, and we're finding ourselves in these worlds of different kind of limits now. Whether it's thinking about the mental health that I have, the kind of work that I want to do, the environmental constraints that, like, I feel like the linear path doesn't quite work, as it seemed like it used to. And then there's this other side of the equation that's like, how do we both best draw from kind of modern science and contemporary thinking, as well as like the wisdom of past and present cultures of how have people lived well in the past, right? How do I like think about all these pieces together? And so I think it's exciting because your work brings us right into the center of this area. And again, something that's super relevant because we're seeing more and more younger generations talking about mental health and what pathways need to be for life. So I think to kind of kick us off, one of the areas that I think encapsulates this is that you kind of talk about is that our kind of pathway of setting goals is broken. And I love this idea because I agree, but I think it's something that we find ourselves hitting walls so many times. So like, let's kind of open that up and start us here in terms of like, what is that? Like, how do we break goals? Like, it seems like something that you can't really break, but we somehow managed to do it.
Yeah, so if you kind of go back to the most common definition of goals, the one that most people are using, it really means getting to a specific destination, right?
Hmm.
We define where we want to get, what success means to us, and then we work really, really hard to get there. And
Hmm.
then two things might happen. Either you don't get there and you're deeply unhappy about that and dissatisfied because you feel like you failed, or interestingly, you get there and you're also disappointed because you thought that by getting there, all of a sudden everything would be perfect, you'd be happy, you'd get everything you desire, and you realize that actually this goal doesn't unlock infinite happiness and that there's maybe another goal now that you can chase.
Hmm.
So it's this infinite treadmill we're all on, chasing the next goal, one after the other, without ever feeling fulfilled. And that's
Hmm.
really how we manage our goals today. I loved how you mentioned connecting scientific wisdom, but also ancient philosophical wisdom, because
Hmm.
if you go back to how scientists approach progress and success, for scientists, success is not getting to a specific destination, it's just learning something new. As
Hmm.
long as you've learned something new, this is success. And that may not look like what you had predicted when
Yeah.
you started, right? And this looks like, for a scientist, like a cycle of experimentation. They ask a question, they're like, okay, what is going on here? Let's formulate a research question, let's test it, and then let's see what happens, right? Well, those cycles of growth is really how a lot of ancient civilizations and ancient philosophies recommend the way you approach human growth as well, right? It's all
Hmm.
wheels and cycles and circles and seasons. It's never
Yeah.
that very linear path that is predetermined and that you have to follow with specific milestones and goals that mean failure if you don't reach them, right? It's all about
Hmm.
transformation and reinventing yourself. So to me, that's the main thing about reinventing our relationship to goals, is really letting go of this linear approach to them and having a
Hmm.
more cyclical approach to goals.
I love that idea too, and it is something interesting too that I was always, when I was studying anthropology as a in school back in the day, it was like, I guess I still study it today too, but like when I was formally studying it, I would always be intrigued when we would find a group or culture or when folks were talking about the cyclical notion of time versus a linear notion, and like even thinking about that is really interesting. When one, we kind of talk about time moves forward, right? We even use like the idea of progress, right? And you write about in the book too, this idea of like progress is a directional or like a kind of orientation that we're moving in a certain pathway, and like uh that, like, I think we often don't always connect the idea of like time as being linear and then also our goals as a thing that like we move forward and do XYZ blah blah, even though like that's 100% how we make a to-do list, right? And how we think about the pathway that we're going down. um, but then, right, this idea of like seasons is a great example there of like we
Yeah.
all know what a season, like there's four of them, and they move our year in a way, and like recognizing that idea is super fun. Then of course I'm going to put my nerd hat and be like, oh yeah, we can talk about chakras and wheels too, and like everything is kind of turning and moving in and on itself, in cyclical and spiral time. And so that is, I think, a very cool way to like help us rethink that. And so I'm curious about this too, because the other thing that you said here, I thought was I want to think with is like the idea of when we're talking about what scientific thinking is doing, and like we talk about, we predict something will happen, or make a hypothesis that I'm going to do X and then we're going to see Y result, and if we do or don't see it, that's still helpful. And this is something that I've seen too in terms of um, you know publication around kind of peer-reviewed journal articles, that there's like a positivity bias. Like I want to publish that something happened, meaning there's an anti-negativity bias. Not that like we don't want to say a negative result, but we don't want to say something nothing happened. But that's totally useful for science too, to say we did not find a change when we did X, and like why didn't happen. And so even this interesting idea that like I'm curious how we think about this. Like when we say we predict a thing, we want to see a kind of positive change result, and like we look away from one that feels negative. And so that kind of pushes, I feel like it builds a bit of that linearity, right? Where it's like, if I don't see a specific type of change that I predict I'm going to see, then it somehow doesn't count.
Mm,
Does that
I
work?
love that you're mentioning this because there's a big movement at the moment in science for open science and
Mm,
pre-registering studies.
yeah.
Pre-registering a study is basically posting your protocol online for everybody to see, and then you run the study, and then you can't
Mm.
go back and change the protocol or what you said you were going to do based on the results. Which sounds crazy that this is not the norm, right?
Yeah.
It's not. So you're forced to accept and to publish whatever results you get, whether positive or negative,
Mm,
whatever results you get, you have to publish them. And I feel like in the way that you manage your goals and the way you design personal experiments, which I talk about in the book, this is why it's so important to define what is the experiment you're going to run and what are the parameters, and to stick to it until the end of
mm,
the experiment, and to really withhold judgment until you're done. So for example, if you say that you're going to run an experiment of publishing a new podcast episode every week for 6 months, you
mm.
can't stop in the middle and say like, I don't know, like this,
Yeah.
I'm not sure this is working, and then decide that nothing happened and not learn anything from it. I mean, you can, but that wouldn't be a very good way or useful way of running an experiment. The useful way of doing this is you decide what you're going to do, you run the experiment, you collect all of that data without any judgment yet.
Mm,
And at the end of the experiment, you look back and you reflect and you ask yourself, okay, did I like this? Did I enjoy it? Was that good? What benefits did it bring? Or was that horrible? Maybe I hated every second of it. And that's data
mm,
too. That's also useful for you to learn and to grow and to decide what your next experiment is going to be. So you can also take some of that new approach to science that we have now that is more open and more honest, I want to say,
mm.
and apply
Yeah.
that to the way you run experiments in your daily life as well.
No, I love that actually. Yeah, it's because we do see like an ongoing conversations too, in terms of like a desire for more transparency and openness across the board, right? Whether it is like how we're doing science, whether it's politics, whether it's how I'm getting my degree, because it's like people love also these kind of more authentic conversations where it's like two people talking about their challenges working, getting a job, trying to find something out, versus like here's the 5 things you got to do to get your resume to have it ready for the whatever the interview. um, and it's interesting to kind of note that like there is that desire to see, and like that can be applied also to the notions of like kind of personal experimentation of what I can do with my life, which I think is really nice. um, especially because we're kind of seeing again, like we're running up to these sort of different
Right.
walls now, or different kind of limitations of like this, the kind of linear path doesn't quite do it for me, right? And like, especially, we're seeing, obviously AI and things are changing in technology, how we are learning, how we're like playing and spending time together. I mean, social media did this before, right? um and kind of changing how we communicate with one another. So this interesting idea of like, we can't just keep doing what we've always done, right? We have to kind of rethink these pieces. And like, I mean, I guess to help concretize this too, also like, you have a really interesting story also, that you did the tech pathway, right? You kind of found your way into the heart of the Google Mecca, um, and then realized that things weren't quite working out the way you had thought. And so, I mean, tell folks, if they're not familiar with your story, like a little bit about how that happened and how that like kind of cracked open the idea of like, wait, let me rethink literally how I'm going to be doing my career pathway, and what my life could be.
So I used to follow a very, very linear career pathway, actually. I went to a pretty good school. I tried to get good grades, and then I got a
Mm,
job at Google. And once I found myself there, uh, I discovered that they had a also fairly linear way of managing success, really, defining it, codifying it, and then in a very kind of almost yeah, I guess Google is a company made of engineers, right? So they had
mm,
really engineered what success looked like and how it worked inside of the company. So you had this rubric that was telling you exactly what to do, when to do it, what kind of projects to work on, what skills to be able to demonstrate. And if you did that, and if you followed that rubric, you would end up climbing the ladder again in a very
mm,
linear way, but you had high visibility and clarity in terms of what success looked like. And I felt like, which was a deep realization for me, but it really felt like to me after a while as if someone had spoiled the movie. I knew exactly what was going to happen, and
mm,
I somehow lost interest in the game because I
mm,
knew exactly what would happen to the main character.
mm,
Um, when I left Google, I decided to start a startup. And that was also interesting because I really thought I was leaving that linear path, but I ended up repeating a lot of the same things that I was doing at Google.
mm,
I tried to follow a playbook. I downloaded all of the case studies from other startups and I tried to figure out how to climb that ladder, just a different ladder.
mm,
And it's only when my startup failed and I found myself completely lost with no clear next rung on the ladder that I could climb that I
mm,
had to finally stop and take a moment to reflect and ask myself, what is it that I truly want to explore? What am I actually curious about?
mm,
If external validation and money was not part of the equation, what is something I would want to be doing every day when I wake up, even if nobody was watching?
mm,
And for me, it's always been the brain. I've always been fascinated with the way we think, the way we feel. And so I went back to school to study neuroscience and ended up on the path that I am on today, which is very wiggly. I genuinely have no idea where I'm going. I just wrote a book. I finished my PhD. I'm also running a small business. I'm writing online. I'm doing a bit of speaking here and there. And the reason why I love this path today is that I have no idea what's going to happen in the movie. I don't know what's going to
mm.
happen next. And I'm a little bit
Yeah.
surprised almost every day with what's on my calendar. And I think that's the way I like it.
Yeah, no, that resonates, and I think that that's great too. That like, you kind of recognize when things aren't working. Like, how do you then sort of reconfigure things? But then it's like, it does require this moment, and there's something important that you write about too, is that we have to be okay with that discomfort of not really knowing what is the next thing. But at the same time, as you noted too, like there's the, when you have a curiosity mindset to it, it kind of says, oh, this is exciting. I don't know what's going to happen. And this is one of these things that, I mean, there's two things that actually stuck out there that I think are really important for us to think about. And I recognize when I was like, reading your story, that one can be in the kind of career treadmill and then both be burnt out by the work and like doing too much, and then also bored at the same time. And like, we often don't realize like those seem like they're antithetical, right? Like, how could I also both be like doing too much and be like, I don't want to do any of this, And like, I've seen that in myself too, in terms of like, putting work in kind of the wrong pathway. And then you realize that like you're doing both these, and it's like the board parts, I think, to your point, is really important. It's like, I know where the movie goes. I know exactly what this ladder climbing would look like. I know where I would go. and I can see it, and I can like assess, do I want to be in that spot, and at the same time, I'm so busy, I don't really have the energy to do that. And how do I put those two signals together and say, wait, maybe this is not the right piece? And the other side is this notion of, for some, for many of us, I mean, it's scary to be like, I don't know what the next thing would be, right? And so it's like this kind of curiosity versus kind of reactive mindset. And so I'm curious, like, to kind of help folks think about, how do we get out of this box? If I feel like I'm kind of stuck and I'm either burnt out and bored, or one or the other, but I'm kind of afraid of, like, I don't know what to do next, right? Either I feel like I don't have the resources, or I don't know what the pathway. Like, how do I kind of help put that mindset together in terms of being more curious versus reactive, I guess?
Yeah, I think you'll like that term, considering that you're an anthropologist. But in the book, I use the term self anthropology,
Mm,
and
yeah.
what I encourage people to do is, again, if you think about the scientific method and that cycle of experimentation, scientists don't just start testing stuff, right? There's a phase of observation. You just observe how things are right now, and then you
Mm,
ask yourself, how could they be different, or why they're working this way? Now let's test this by designing an experiment and collect data. But it all starts always with observation. And what I call self anthropology in a bit of a cheeky way is basically the idea that you're going to pretend that you're an anthropologist studying your own life. And the same way an anthropologist goes and studies a different culture and look at it with fresh eyes, asking, why are they doing things this way? Or why are they
mm,
communicating this way? And why are they approaching this in this order and not that one? Why is this more important to them than that other thing? And taking notes, and really, again, without any judgment, just looking at how things are working in that environment, you can learn a lot about your
mm,
life, and you can discover patterns that you may not have noticed in the past because of exactly what you just described earlier. You're so
mm,
busy trying to climb that ladder that you never take the time to take a little step back and really ask yourself, wait, why am I even doing this thing? And why am I doing it this way?
mm,
So I encourage people who are in this situation, feeling a little bit stuck, not quite sure what to do next, to just go back to starting with observation. You don't need to have the solution yet. You don't need to have a plan yet. You just need to observe what is currently working, what is currently not working for you. Just taking little notes. And in a very practical way, an exercise that I do with members of my community is I tell them, for 24 hours, you're becoming the anthropologist of your own life. You
mm,
can do that in your Apple Notes and your Google Keep, whatever notes you're taking on your phone. And anytime you notice something interesting as you go about your day, you take a note. That could be
mm,
after a conversation with someone where you're like, oh, I feel weirdly energized after talking for 20 minutes about this obscure topic with a colleague. Or
mm,
that could be things like, oh, I feel really drained after giving this presentation, or I was feeling anxious all morning before this meeting. Little observations like this, just do that for 24 hours. Those are going to be the seeds for you to then decide what you want to try to tweak and play with and experiment with.
mm. Yeah, that's great. I think it is interesting, because oftentimes we want to add that value judgment right away. As we're like, yeah, I'm either seeing a thing or I'm not seeing a thing, right? Or that, yeah, the presentation was hard, but I don't then say, let me observe, and actually, how was I emotionally feeling? How was I physically feeling? How was I seeing other people reacting in the scenario? Or did I, did I feel energized? And like, that is a really important thing that, yes, obviously, cool plug for anthropology, but like, this bonus too, because even this idea of kind of withholding judgment, I think is really important, right? And um, a colleague of mine, Jay Hasbrook, anthropologist, he's been at Meta for a long time, so also in the tech sector, like, um, wrote a book called Ethnographic Thinking. And one of the kind of features that like goes with design thinking is this idea of withholding judgment as we're observing, as we're getting a sense of like what it is that we're seeing, because we do want to be like, nah, that's either unimportant data, or that one's the most important data. Even that, like interrogating why is this more or less important, right? Um, is I think it's a really important part to be able to kind of learn to pay attention to, right? And have that kind of curiosity and willingness to do so, because it is tricky and uncomfortable to be like, let me just watch how I feel and watch how this is happening. And like, as if I was an alien coming down to earth and like saying, okay, what, how is this space working? Uh,
And to
is,
your point, I just want to
yeah.
add, because I think you're making a really important point here. we talked about how we're too busy to take the time and give ourselves the space to reflect on how we feel and how things are going. But to your point here, I feel like sometimes also we keep ourselves busy because we're maybe too scared
Mm,
of
yeah.
deeply looking at how we're actually feeling, because we know deep down that if we start doing this, if we start honestly observing the way we feel inside and the way we behave on a day-to-day basis, this might lead to very big changes, and big changes can be very scary. So
Mm.
sometimes it just feels a little bit more reassuring and comfortable to just keep busy and not look too closely as to how we feel.
Yes. Oh, 100%. No, that's a great point. Um, and it is one of those, I'm sure you hear this too, where it's someone's, "How you doing?" "Oh, I'm just busy," and that's like the everybody's response. And truthfully, yes, we are all busy, but like it's this funny point of like it's either become a badge of honor, and or I think you're right that for many of us, and oftentimes it's like that's so I don't have to think about the other actual questions, because the questions are hard, right? It's like it's one of those things that if you've done it before, it will feel better when you do it. But it's hard to excavate the old bones that you don't want to do, because I think something else that's important that you helped me think about too through your book is that this idea that like we all have, of course, this inner curiosity, right? And like we're born with that. That's how kids and babies play. I have a almost 6 month old son now, and it's like watching him just begin to discover, and he has zero preconceptions of how things are supposed to go, and often to hilarity, right? It's important to recognize like that's the kind of this there's the childlike wonder. It's like it's very different when you're watching your own kid do it. But it's like this funny thing of like learning that that's going to be there, and like I always want to make sure that I keep that, or like we like how do we keep that in our lives. And so you note that we often see that kind of inner curiosity kind of quelled over time, right? I think part of it is too, like through the linear thinking model. It's like, well, there's not a ton of space for curiosity if it's like go down this is you can be curious in this little box, and that's it. So like let's think about this. Oftentimes that kind of inner curiosity gets quelled. Like how do we either kind of excavate or unearth that? Like we have observation as one bucket. Like what else can we do in that area to kind of say, let me poke at that little voice.
And
Maybe
so
be less busy.
so there's observation, and then once you start observing those different patterns, you can get back into a bit more like of an active mode
Mm,
and start playing with ideas and maybe testing some of them. And this is where I really like the container of the experiment for this,
mm,
because again, as you mentioned, we're like, okay, how do I even practice curiosity if I've been in a just purely execution, climbing the ladder mode? How do I re-inject this into my life? That's why my book is called Tiny Experiments and not Big Experiments,
yeah.
because I really feel like keeping them small means that you can integrate them in your life without making big changes yet. And I think they will result in big changes and transformation, but you don't have to do that from the get go. You can start with
Mm,
something quite small. And so those seeds of inspiration, that those observations that you made, you can look at them and then ask yourself, okay, what is something that could be different? What could I play with? What could I change? What could I test? So, for example, if you've noticed that a specific topic gives you a lot of energy, what if you blocked an hour or 2 hours every week to explore that topic? No
mm,
emails, your phone in another room. You tell the kids that they have to go and play and do something else, because
mm,
for 1 or 2 hours, you're just going to be a nerd and explore everything you want to learn about this topic, and do that a little bit every week and maybe take notes, etc., just for the purpose of exploring an idea that you're curious about.
mm,
If you've noticed that you're extremely tired in the morning and you can't really get good job done, good work done, maybe try shifting some of your low effort admin tasks to the morning. Test that
mm,
for a few weeks. And again, take little notes, see how that feels. Is that working for you or not? And you can
mm,
really design those small personal experiments in any area of your life. It can be in your relationships with your partner, saying, let's experiment with a weekly date night where we both
mm,
come with prepared questions for the other one and we just
mm,
ask each other about our lives. You can experiment with your health, with your creativity, with your work processes, knowledge management, any of those different kind of things. And by doing so, it will also make you even more observant of the way these things are changing your life. You'll be more
Mm.
present. And so even if there's no big milestone or outcome that you can pin and say, this is success, you will actually progress. You will actually change. You will actually evolve as a human being. And to me, that is a better definition of success.
Yeah, no, I love that too, and I think, and it pushes us also to this, like the more circular kind of framing versus the like, I hit milestone X Y Z and now I've done thing, you know, now I'm 10% better, you know, not to hit on 10% happier, but that was an interesting idea, right? In terms of meditation, but like, but I think that I think that's a great point to kind of recognize that it can both be anything, right? And I love the idea of like, yeah, let's either come with, set date night for, for 6 weeks. We're going to have, here's 10 questions that we want to know about each other. And like, they're going to get progressively harder to answer or something, or whatever it is. Or even this of like, yeah, like, are you not a morning person? Like, that's actually fine. Like, don't let business tell you that you're crappy. It's like, just then change your task so you don't have to eat. What is it? Mark Twain said, eat the frog first or whatever. Eat the biggest frog first. It's like, no, eat the biggest frog later if you want to eat the smallest one first, if that's easier for you, right? Um, and kind of recognizing that, like, it, with that too, like this, the kind of time boxing it, right? I think is really an important piece that you point out too, because it's like, hey, how do I know if it's working? Be like, well, part of it, like, say, if I'm gonna do this for 6 weeks or 1 week or a month or whatever it is, and like commit to doing that, and then you can actually see, okay, how do I feel after doing that for this amount of time? And it's funny because, as someone that is what is it, a continuously bad planner, that like, it's, it always feels hard to put these things, but when I put a small time box of something, like, it's much easier to then both get something done, but then feel like it's more, I can accomplish it, right? It's like, it kind of gets rid of that paralysis of like, how do I do this, um, and that ties into this other piece I thought was really interesting that you talk about, is that like, it's like chronos versus kairos, right? It's like the quality and quantity of time. So like, thinking about this idea of like, both how much time am I putting into something, but like, as I'm working on something, it's not about, did I put in, like, we're gonna hit on numbers here, like 10,000 hours, like, do this thing. It's like, that's not necessarily the point that we're talking about here, right? Because that sounds like a big experiment. Sounds like a hell of a lot of work, right? But I could do something smaller. So how do we think about this idea of like this, the chronos and kairos, in terms of the time we're putting into something?
Yes. So yeah, you perfectly defined it. Chronos, quantity of time, kairos, quality of time, and the ancient Greeks has those two different words to describe time. And so chronos is really the time of clocks, of meetings, of saying, let's be here at 10 a.m. and we're going to work on this for 1 hour. Whereas when you focus on kairos, what you're really trying to optimize for is depth of time rather than as much time as possible.
Mm,
And so if you have 20 minutes of really deep work where you're highly connected with and in flow with whatever you're working on, that's going to have more value than spending 10,000 hours practicing whatever skill.
mhm,
It's also knowing sometimes that some moments have more weight and more quality than others.
mm,
And that also can help you navigate decisions in your life. So, for example, that's knowing that in this moment, maybe bath time with your kid is more
mhm.
important than answering this email that is in your inbox. That's really
Yeah.
having this approach of kairos and knowing that each minute has a specific and special, unique quality to it that you can attune yourself to and really decide what you want to experience. What do you want your life and your experience to be in this moment, rather than having the chronos approach where each minute is equal and the goal is to
Mm,
do as much as possible using all of those tiny boxes that all add up to your life. And
yeah.
the best way I think to show to really for anyone listening to this to know that they have experienced kairos, they know what it is intrinsically, is that how sometimes you have a conversation with someone and then you look at the time and it was
Mhm.
4 hours talking with them and you
Yeah.
really didn't see the time going. That's kairos. That really
Mm,
shows you that time is elastic depending on its quality, and that
mm,
other times, things, go very slowly. If you don't want to be here, if you're
yeah.
bored, if you don't feel connected with whoever you're with, so that's kairos. We've all experienced it, but we can be a little bit more intentional with it.
Mhm. No, I love that idea too, and it's counter to, of course, the other, like, I think frustrating prevailing wisdom, right? That time is money, right? Because then it's like, because a dollar is an individual thing, right? That it's like worth this much, and like if we say time is that, then it has a specific value too, and it's like, but it doesn't, right? Like we have a subjective experience that matters of what we're doing and what we're doing it, and like getting in, like as you said too, like that flow, right, where that time just flies by, and it's suddenly it's been a couple hours, and you're like, wow, I didn't even realize what I was, reading a book, talking to a friend, watching a movie, playing with your kid, going on a walk. Or I mean, or if you're, I don't know if you're coding, that's fine too, right? It's like, it doesn't matter what it is, but we all know, we've had that, right? And I think it is really powerful to recognize that it's helpful to like look again, like look back and reflect on those moments and know that when we had them, and giving different weight to time uh, is such an important piece. And I think that speaks to the importance of a mindfulness approach that you also talked about, right? That you know, what does mindfulness mean as we think about this, right? Like oftentimes we're like, oh, some people say, oh, it's like meditating. It's like maybe like part of it, but like I think it's really this. It's like, am I aware of the experience that I'm having, right? And am I kind of being more attuned to that itself versus, I meditated for 10 minutes, right? Um, and it's funny because oftentimes, like, if people say, well, I don't know either how to be mindful or or it sounds like some foo-foo stuff. I don't know. It's like, well, then just sit and meditate for 10 minutes. And like, we'll give you a time to start with, but then think about how you felt during that 10 minutes. And if it was anxious, that's actually fine. And if it was like bored, that's okay too. If it was sleepy, that's fine. If it was excited, that's also great. And it's like recognizing that we don't need to judge the chronos there, right? It's like the chronos gave us just a bounded moment to try something, but really then we're going after the kairos after the end of it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that non-judgmental aspect is so important. There are a lot of experiences that we simply cannot control, whether they're due to external factors or internal chemistry or just, events, relationships that we have. There are simply a lot of things that we feel and that we think that are out of our control.
Mm-hmm.
But then we have somewhat a little bit more control over how we respond to our own thoughts and emotions. And this is exactly what you're describing here, being aware of them, but also not judging them, not judging necessarily whether they're good or they're bad. They just happened.
Mm-hmm.
And you can learn from any of these experiences, whether good or bad. That kind of like goes back to what we were talking about earlier also, is that if you start disconnecting your actions from this artificial idea of success, you can just again be aware and observe of how you feel, your emotions, your thoughts, etc., as you explore an idea or a path or something that you're curious about. And if you don't get to the place you expected to get to, that's
Mm-hmm.
fine. That can actually be good. Something unexpected, something surprising, something that you can learn from. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that connects to mindfulness as well.
Yeah, that's a great point too. And yeah, if we're able to not judge or prejudge a scenario, what's interesting about that too, that has me thinking that I like the idea that the quality of our experiences in time is we can, it matters. I don't want to prejudge that, but then also we have things like procrastination that I don't want to do something, or I'm like, I just can't get started, right? And what I love is that you also tackle this idea that it's like, well, actually, that's not a bad thing. Like, we have such a negative idea because like productivity, also again in modern like business parlance, right? It's like go do this. Here's your 5 points of to do list. And procrastination, we're always fighting against it. Somehow, how are we always fighting against this thing that we don't want to, we don't want to do or don't want to start? Like, that's curious, but I think I like the way you flip this for us and say, actually, let's rethink what procrastination is doing here. It's not just this bad guy that we have to overcome, but it might be telling us something important. So, I mean, tell me like a bit about what that is, and then also like how'd you come to that idea that procrastination is not such a bad guy after all?
Yeah, it's this is a kind of a thread that runs through the entire book, right? Is that any challenge can become an opportunity for growth if you choose to approach it from a place of curiosity.
Hmm.
And I chose procrastination as an illustration of this because I know this is something that most people think is bad. Most people
Mm-hmm.
agree procrastination is bad. I don't want to be procrastinating. If you look up online articles to try and help you deal with procrastination or manage procrastination, most of them are titled How to Beat Procrastination. There's
Yeah.
something really violent going on there. And so, yeah, we really want to get rid of it. Um, and so I picked that example as something that really most people just want to get rid of, and
Mm,
showing how you can actually grow and learn if you choose to approach it from a place of curiosity. Because what is procrastination really? It's a signal from your brain and your body that something is not quite right, and that
mm,
you're not in the best conditions possible to do whatever task you feel like you should be doing. And
mm,
that problem can come from different places. It can be a problem coming from the task itself. So maybe actually you should not even be doing that task in the first place. Maybe
mm.
someone else should be doing it. Or maybe we should not even be doing that task in the first place. It ended up on your task list and it's been there,
Yeah.
and you've been feeling terrible about it for not doing it for 2 weeks. But actually, nothing bad's going to happen if nobody does that thing. So you can just remove it from your task list. So
Yeah.
that could be the reason why you're procrastinating, is that subconsciously you know there's no point doing this thing. Another reason why you may be procrastinating is because the task is just not fun, not enjoyable, not exciting. That's also a very valid reason why you don't want to work on it. And in that case, once you've identified this, by approaching it from a place of curiosity, you can say, okay, so, okay, I know I do want to do the task. I think it makes sense to do it, but how can I make it fun? Maybe work with
Mm,
someone, go to your favorite coffee shop, etc. And other times, another signal that procrastination can be sending you is that, let's say, yes, you're convinced you want to do it. It looks like fun, and you're still not doing
mm,
it. Why? Probably because you feel like you don't have the necessary skills or expertise or tools. You're not able to do it yourself. So, in that case, you can get those tools, you can get support, you can get coaching, mentoring, but you're not stuck anymore. And
mm,
you'll notice when I go through all of those different potential sources of procrastination that, again, there's no judgment there. I'm really
mhm,
just looking at the signal and I'm asking, hey, procrastination, what are you trying to tell me here?
mm.
Almost talking
Yeah.
to it as if it was a friend, and say, hey, I know you're trying to tell me something. What are you
Mm.
saying? I'm listening.
I think that that's super important. It's like that power of reframing too, right? It's something that I it's like I recognized years ago in my life too that when I was feeling anxious for something, like kind of like this doesn't feel great. It's like you want to kind of get rid of the feeling that you feel like this isn't good. But then I kind of learned to reframe and say, well, no, what is this friend in my neighborhood here like trying to like, tell me? Like it's trying to protect me for some reason. It's like wants to make sure that I'm okay. And it's like this interesting idea of like, oh, like anxiety's stopping up to kind of say hello. Let me see what it has to say. And procrastination, that resonates in that similar kind of way that in one box, this is a negative thing, right? And the other side, it's like, what is it trying to tell me? And like, oh, wait, maybe I need to get some different kind of skills, or maybe we can actually improve the process entirely. And, you know, the whatever the 48 emails I'm supposed to send, like we can actually automate that process or whatever it is, right? Like recognizing we don't have to do it that specific way. And so it's not procrastination that's the problem. It's like us kind of seeing, how can I move through what needs to get done, right? And like that might be going around it. It might be, getting skills for it. And I think that that's actually really helpful. And like, to generate something out of it, right? And I think even this concept too of kind of the generative form of thinking is something that I took away from the work too that I think is really helpful because it kind of says when we have a roadblock, that's asking ourselves, is it a roadblock? And then or what is the block trying to tell us? Like, and maybe again, it is like I need to get a different kind of pathway to get through it or around it. And something that really stuck with me too, like, so one, I've got my short-term procrastination thinking. The other side is like this, like much longer legacy thinking, which I thought was really interesting in a way to approach this too. Cause it's like, again, linear pathway. It's like, I'm thinking about, okay, what am I going to accomplish across my boxes in my calendar? And then both either leave behind, but like legacy is an interesting like challenge point because it's like either what do I leave behind when I die or just when I leave a company or something, right? It's like, how do people know what I did? And we're like there's a slight obsession with that also in kind of today's contemporary culture, and like you also help us like smack that around a little bit as well too. I guess that's violent metaphor, right? We're gently massage it to kind of help us think slightly differently about what it could be. So, like let's go to that end of the spectrum too. Like, so we have legacy thinking now of like let's actually rethink what we're trying to do there too. Like, how does that reshape our thinking in your pathway?
Yes. I absolutely had. I felt like I had to have a chapter about this question in the book because I know that a lot of the kind of people like you, like me, who actually do care about having an impact, a positive
Mhm.
impact on the world and the people around us. As you said, this concept of legacy, making sure that we we leave something behind where we're remembered, and we're really just having this reassurance that it mattered that we were here at some point.
Mhm.
It is something that we all cling onto, as if it would give meaning to our lives. And what I want to do what I do in the book and in the last chapter actually is that I challenge that thinking. And what I say is that you can create meaning in your life in the here and now, in the
Mm.
present, by shifting your mindset from how am I going to be remembered when I'm gone, which, when you think about it, makes absolutely no sense. You're not even going to be there yourself to enjoy all of that, you know? So,
That's true.
shifting your mindset to how can I be as generative as possible in the present, in the here and now, positively contributing to the lives of my fellow living human beings who are sharing this earth with me at the moment.
Mm.
And if everybody did that, actually, we would end up in a indirect way leaving a better legacy. But
Mm.
I don't think focusing on leaving a better legacy is the way to go about achieving that. So that's
Yeah.
really what I advocate for, is really trying to have the most positive impact possible you can today. And it doesn't have to be on in the entire world. It can be on your local community, family, friends, etc. The great
Mm.
thing about this approach as well, which ties back to the idea again of experimentating, is that you can see straight away if what you're doing is working,
Mm.
and you can adapt your approach and you can keep on tweaking until you get to the kind of impact that you want to have. If you wait until you're dead to for the results to be available, you're not going to be able to do anything to change the trajectory if that's not really where you want it to go.
Mm. I mean, and I think that's a great point. In like, uh, while we're seeing also kind of this, I want to say rebellion, but it's also more just like, this push against retirement is like, wait till you're like, I can't wait till I'm retired. It's like, why? Do the things that, like the kind of pushback we see is people say, well, just do what you want to do now. Like, what are you waiting till you're potentially 65 or 70 or 80? Which, will we even be able to retire? I don't know. So that, I mean, that's probably part of the question there, but this idea that like, yeah, why are we putting off potentially what we want to see in the world? Like it seems when you think about it, it's kind of crazy, right? You're like, you won't even be there. So it's like, you might have done some good, but like, the story might change. Again, one of these things is like, um depending who you ask, like, let's say Rockefeller did great things, for the United States. It's like, yeah, well, he also like screwed a bunch of people and like, did a ton of like environmental damage and ruined a bunch of, culture. So it's like, there's all these like bigger questions of like, okay, like where and when does even a good legacy stick around for? And like, how long does it change as cultural trends change? And so it seems like, I think it's a very important point, I guess, to kind of have us recognize that like, um, there's more work to do now than there is like in the potential future.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned retirement as well, because another side of the coin of being too focused and obsessed with legacy is that you have a lot of people in their 60s, 70s, 80s who are perfectly healthy and capable of having an amazing impact on their local
Mm.
communities, that don't feel like they can do anything because it's too late to build a
Mm.
legacy at this stage. They feel like, oh, like, now I only have a few decades left. Like, there's no point. Most people who build a really big legacy, they got started earlier. They did that over the course of their entire career. It's too late, right?
Mm.
If you stop focusing on legacy and on generativity right now in the present moment, it's never too late to get started with any kind of, meaningful, impactful project that you want to work on.
Yeah, no, no, I love that point. Yes, because it is like, oh yeah, it's like, no, it's too late when you're dead. But it's like, if you're living, then yeah, exactly right. And that's the thing. It's like people are living now here, right? So it's like, instead of a legacy, we need like a generacy. I don't, you know, but I think that's a really powerful point too. And I think also with that too, and something I take from, again, thematically through the book too, is like, it's not like having the biggest impact is not doing the most things, right? It's not the quantity thing. necessarily, right? It's like not do 10 more things. It's more like look for that quality, right? That those kind of kairos experiences that you can have with folks, whether it's cooking a meal with somebody or like getting to know your neighbors or taking their trash out. It's like those things are actually what people remember, at the end of the day, versus, oh, I wrote 3,000, pages in this dissertation that no one read. It's like, it's big and important, as we all know, but like at the same time, it's not necessarily, it might be the thing that changes somebody's life, but it probably won't change as many people's lives. But again, that's a future thing, right? What could my thesis do?
Mm.
Um, but I love this idea too of kind of reminding us to come back to the here and now. And again, also that speaks to the mindfulness angle too, right? That like, if we're being present in kind of noting what am I experiencing in this moment with self, with others, then that also says this is that moment of generation. And one piece of that too, that another kind of bow to tie there, which I really appreciated that you explored too, is like the idea of playing and dancing, right? Like these have to be important parts of our work and how we do it. Um, and that, like, this resonated with me too, because it was like when I left a corporate job a few years ago. And I was in this kind of path of like, I don't know what I'm like, I was burnt out, not sure what I was going to do. I wanted to figure out the next thing. And it's like, I ended up taking a month-long road trip and like did some speaking engagements and like visited family. And it was like this very nice, like first time I'd done the thing. I was like, I always want to take the Great American Road Trip. I've never done that, and it was like this very like, it was perfect timing in this right moment. But it was like, I had zero schedule. Like I did be at this place on this date, but how I got there, right? And like what I did in between, right? And that was actually one of the most important things I could have done at the time, because it was like, let me put that space into experience this moment now where I don't have to be anywhere else. I don't have to be thinking about what I should be doing. And it like changes your perception, right? Because you're like, I'm watching trees and I'm sitting at this rest stop and I'm looking at these dogs running around in this yard, and it's like, it's very, spacious, I guess, in one way. And you kind of realize there is that space in the center once you finally kind of stop moving for a second and you realize how much space is actually around you. And it was, I guess, and from all that came this idea of playfulness, right? Like, I can play with what I could do, what this could be. And so I'm kind of curious your thoughts about this too. Like, how did you come to play as one of these key pieces of like finding joy in work, finding joy in experimentation? Because it is fun, I think,
Yeah, you did mention at the beginning of our conversation how children are naturally curious, and another behavior that they have that is very natural to them is learning through play, exploring through play, being
Mm,
naturally playful about anything that they do and they approach, and also connecting and relating to others through play. And I
mm,
really think that as adults, we could learn from kids when it comes to injecting a little bit more playfulness in the way we approach things. And playfulness, I know it may sound a little bit antithetic with the scientific mindset, but it's actually really important, because a lot of scientific discoveries happen through being playful, open minded, looking at things in a different way, asking questions that are non obvious. So you can really also approach problems and challenges in your life from this angle of playfulness and just asking yourself, what if I approach this a little bit more like a game? What if I stopped caring so much about the outcome? What if this
mm,
was fun? And very often, when you ask yourself these questions and you just start playing a little bit more with ideas, with projects, with challenges, you'll not only discover new ways of approaching these things you're working on, but it will just be more fun and enjoyable too while you're working on them.
No, I love it. So I think I encourage us all, let's get out there and play, right? It's like remembering that it turns out we get all serious, but it's like life can be fun, And as creepy as the Joker was in The Dark Knight, like when he's asking why so serious, there's something to it, right? It's like, we can have fun with this, right? Um, I think so. Again, thank you so much for chatting with me today. Like this has been, it's super fun to kind of think through. It's been playful, right? To kind of think through these ideas, and I appreciate the work that you're putting out, 'cause it is important for us, as so many folks are rethinking what they can do for their career paths. And again, like retirement, like why wait? These questions I think are really important for us to kind of learn to let go of legacy and negative perceptions of procrastination, and kind of stop talking about time as this one linear pathway, but we can actually experiment, around ideas and around ideas. Um, and so if folks both want to learn more, I'm excited for them to check out your book. You've got Nest Labs also. So tell me a bit about Nest Labs. So if folks want to, you've got course, you got community, you got a whole like great world there too. So what's happening over in the lab space that folks need to know about?
Yes. So Nest Labs, I write a weekly newsletter that I send to about 100,000 people every week on Thursday.
Awesome.
So that's completely free. You can sign up and I discuss a lot of the topics that we talked about today. There's also a private community where we have online courses and coaching, little workshops, and we also conduct experiments all together. So you can create your
Cool.
little luck book there and announce your experiment, and then everybody's kind of like joining in, supporting you, providing feedback and support and accountability. So yeah, so that's Nest Labs. And then there's the book, obviously, that's coming out very soon. And
Mhm.
that's separate. You can go on tinyexperiments.org and you can learn more about the book there.
Cool. And we'll link to it in the show notes and all that good stuff so folks can find out your work. But thank you again so much for putting all this out there in the world. I think it's such important topics and conversations and timely for where we're at. So thank you for generating so many good things and great to talk with you today.
Thanks so much, Adam. Thank you.